Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. My name is Jill Sheehan, and I am the co-founder of Empire Charter Consultants, a national charter school services group, and I'm so happy to join you. A little over 13 years ago, I met Dr. Reid when she took over the school, Bronx Charter School for Excellence, the very first school in her portfolio. I remember the day like it was yesterday. I walked into the building and there were just books lining the hallway. And she said, I'm getting rid of all of this. And we spent hours walking around her building and talking about her school. Now she's in 10 locations in both New York and Connecticut. And if I can convince her, Florida. Dr. Reid, I am so thrilled to see your face today. I'd love for you to tell the people on the session about yourself and about your schools.
So welcome, everyone. So what do you want me to say? You want
Well, let's talk about your schools first.
Okay.
The communities they serve.
So as Jill shared, we met 13 years ago when I started at Bronx Charter School for Excellence. At the time, it was just Bronx Charter School for Excellence. Now it's Bronx Excellence 1, because we have 2, 3, 4, and 5 now. And I was brought on to save, kind of help turn around a school that was struggling, in jeopardy of probably not getting its charter renewed. And from that point on, we became a national blue ribbon school. So we were one of the first in the state of New York in charter schools. And we had so many kids on our waiting list that part of our strategic plan, along with my board and community members, we decided that we were going to open up more schools. We actually decided that we were going to have a tri-state focus. So we wanted to go in New Jersey and we wanted to go in Connecticut. But of course, timing was all off. So the cap had been reached in New York. And ironically, Connecticut had issued an RFP. So even though it didn't really fit our timeline, that we were going to take advantage of the opportunity and apply for a Connecticut charter earlier, probably like 2 years earlier than what we had planned. Connecticut had issued its last RFP, I believe 5 or 6 years before that. So after Bronx Excellence 1, it was Stanford Excellence. And then the next year, the cap was lifted and we were able to get charters for Bronx Excellence 2, 3, 4, and 5. And each school is a K-8, so there are 2 schools. So that's how we get to 10 schools.
That's amazing. So it's very true. I actually met you. I left the authoriser's office and went to work for an advocacy organization. And our first conversation was your school was a school in trouble and that you were probably looking at closure. And you said, no, I'm not. And it was less than 2 years later, the Blue Ribbon School. So congratulations. We talk a lot. I consider you one of my most hilarious friends. And I say off camera because a lot of our conversations aren't actually about schools. But during the pandemic, we spoke a number of times about schools and what they were doing to help their communities. Could you tell us about the programs you implemented during COVID, especially in the beginning when everything was in chaos? It seemed to be the most critical time.
So, I mean, we have this formula at Bronx Excellence where everything is family and student driven. So when it comes to decision making, we have the students and the family in the center, and we're like, okay, how can the ecosystem support the families? And so all of us were scrambling in March. We didn't know what was really going on. We knew that the schools were going to be closed. We thought we were only going to be closed about 2 or 3 weeks. We did not know that it was a major pandemic. I think everyone was in the same situation. And New York became one of those hot spots. It became a zone. And, as folks across the country saw on the coast, especially in New York City, we had a lot of folks getting sick with COVID, a lot of death. I remember my mom in California, she was just devastated to see the news with their refrigerated trucks in Brooklyn and in the Bronx. And just all the death. And so we took a temperature with our families, and we found out that our families and also our staff, because about 60% of our staff come from our community. So they were also suffering as well. So we also had to put our staff in that center when we were doing kind of like this, how do we solve this problem? Let's work backwards. And one of the first things we decided to do was to set up a case management model to where every single staff member was in charge of a group of kids and their families. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody. So everybody had at least, even if it was a school aide or a custodian or office aide, everyone, operations across with instructional staff had a group of students and families that they would work with through the pandemic. Or at the time, it was spring of 2020. And so what does that mean? The first thing is doing daily calls. So we're doing wellness checks. We were doing one-to-one tutoring. And we found out, that's how we found out all the things that were going on in the homes. We found out that families, there are 2 schools in our network that are in North Bronx area. And a lot of essential workers families are in those schools. And so we had to provide a different kind of support for those particular schools. The schools in Bronx Excellence 1 and 2, they're in a particularly different neighborhood. So we had to provide a different type of support for those families. And then Bronx 5 is one of our hardest hit neighborhoods. It's a transient neighborhood. A lot of families live in temporary housing. And it's a neighborhood that a lot of people had immigrated to from Puerto Rico after the hurricane. So we're already dealing with one, dramatic or traumatic experience, and now we're layering it on top of that. So we had to come up with a plan for all the different schools and all the different families. And what we found out across the board, along with just needing to talk, we needed to be a shoulder to cry on. We found out that a lot of our families, they were losing their jobs. They didn't have any money. And so we said, what can we do? A lot of families were afraid to come out of their apartments. It's hard to share what it was like to be in the Bronx at that time, because other places, they weren't experiencing it. They weren't experiencing the rates of the COVID infection in the neighborhoods were just really high in New York City, and definitely in those particular neighborhoods. And so the first thing we came up with is we have to feed our families. So I immediately, along with a group of staff members, we did our phone tree as we usually do. And we called community leaders. We called parents, families. We have this thing where we're all connected to each other. So we know this particular storefront, these people know this family, they know this family. So we just immediately just rush into our network. And we were able to get 6 grocery stores, local grocery stores, to provide groceries for our families. So we've set up a grocery store initiative where we have credit accounts at each one of these stores. Families will let us know if they need food. We have a chart, a different system based on family size and a certain amount. They can go weekly to get groceries. We first started off where we were like, okay, you can go for 2 weeks, and families are like, we don't have enough room in the refrigerator. We have to go once a week. And so, and the reason that we did that and not the food pantry or the restaurant serving food and things like that is because to me, that's not dignified. I just want just like we were all gloving up and wearing our mask and running out to go to the grocery store. I wanted our families to go to the grocery store just like everybody else and not feel like they were standing in a soup kitchen line. That's just not how we want to treat our family members, and they're part of the Excellence family. So you need to go to the grocery store, go to the grocery store. And we still have that initiative going on. We've spent over $200,000 feeding our families since April.
I wanted to say something before we talk about the arts and other things you did. I had a conversation with a parent I think a few weeks ago, and your name came up. She was talking about charter schools, and she told me her child goes to your school, and she said this woman literally saved our life by giving us groceries. And I got really emotional, or, I was like, oh man, I'm going to cry on this phone. And she said, that woman saved her life. So a grocery initiative and keeping a family dignity. And you said something also, you were really critical about paying attention to your schools in different communities, and you didn't bucket them all into, we're just going to do the same thing. You actually decided on services based on the communities that you serve, correct? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did that happen in Connecticut as well?
Connecticut is a different community. Our free and reduced numbers are not the same as in the Bronx, so we respond differently for Connecticut. So what we did for Connecticut is that we couldn't get the grocery store initiative, but we got gift cards for families who were in need. So again, just like you said, every school has a different set of kids, a different set of staff. It's in a different neighborhood, so you have to respond differently. What was really cool about the grocery store initiative is that a lot of our we went to our families to say, look, this grocery store, number one, what's the grocery store that you shop at? Where do you shop? And then they would tell us, and then we would say, okay, who in the neighborhood has the pull for this particular grocery store? Because we know some owners of grocery stores, but we wanted to know, like, what store do you shop at? Because we just don't want to go to a ShopRite, and that's not the grocery store. Because we also have families who have religious food differences and things that they need. Like, I have families who eat halal. I have Muslim families. I have Hindu families. I have Catholic, like every religion, every ethnicity, every race, every culture in all of our schools. So I have families who don't shop at ShopRite or shop at a Stop and Shop. They shop at the local grocery store that provides the cultural foods that they eat. And so at first it was like a domino effect. It was like we started with one grocery store, and then we say, okay, do you know the guy in this neighborhood? Yeah, I know him. We get the same deliveries, whatever. I say, give him a call and tell him. But then I would also send someone who was a community person who they would trust to say, look, parents are going to come in. They're good for paying their bills. They're going to pay their bills. And so once it started, it just turned into kind of like a domino, and the grocery store started actually giving free food to our families. So then we would get a call back, and the families would say, we didn't have to pay. They were so amazed that a school would be doing this, that they actually gave us free food. And so what was great about it is that I also heard from store owners that folks weren't coming to the grocery stores. And so this actually helped them stay open. They were turning away some of their deliveries because the food was spoiling. So because so it's like I always say it's the ecosystem. We all take care of each other. And that's super important. So.
Darius asked, have you done any work with community schools? And I would be one of those people who say every one of your schools is run individually as a community school. So do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, I know the kind of like the traditional aspect of like a community school, where I see more of like the wraparound services, if you're referring to that, or the particular organization that kind of runs, kind of like the template for community schools. I think we have different aspects of all that. The definition for me for community school is I made sure when we were coming up with the name for excellence, it just wasn't excellent schools. I was very particular. It took about a year to come up with the name, that I had to have community in there because I wanted to emphasize that the schools can't exist without the community. Community can't exist without the school. So it's all together. And so it was very intentional to have that in there.
And we've spoken about that, schools, charter schools being true anchors in their community and what that means. Talk about the arts program.
Mm-hmm. So in the summer, when we Everyone had to do the grueling reopening plans that we had to turn into various authorizers and state education departments. We were really trying to, what lessons did we learn from the spring? And then how could we actually open up schools in September and do it in a way where we're honoring families who want a full remote program, but also honoring families who actually need for their kids to come to school. So based on school size, we're in New York City, we're in the area, schools are smaller. So we had to come up with a hybrid program. And with the hybrid, we had kids come 2 days a week. And then they would be off remote the other 2 days. And Wednesdays, nobody went into the buildings because that's when we had our deep cleaning of all the campuses. And just like getting just going back into the memories of all this stuff. It's so hectic. Like, first of all, I can't believe that we're already in June. So, I mean, it's amazing how we we're here already. And I don't know, I have to pause for a minute because I'm getting a little choked up because everybody knows how hard the summer was and how we didn't know what was going on and how to make sure everybody was taken care of. And we said kids can't be on a screen all day. From 8 o'clock in the morning all the way till 4 o'clock. We just knew that it just wasn't conducive. It just wasn't going to work. So how could we break up the day? And so we ran a pilot program in the summer where I kind of tested out. I said, what is the likelihood that children will do an arts program in the summer? Would they do arts virtually? And I said, okay, let's just run a pilot. So I got about 10 teaching artists and some of our art teachers within our network to run arts programs in the summer virtually. We did dance, we did cartooning, we did architecture classes, whatever the artist came up with, we said, let's try it out. And there were so many kids who participated in it and they loved it. So I said, okay, I think we got something here. Maybe we can do from 8:30 to 12, 11:30 to 12. We can do, some core instruction, have a lunch break, and then from 1 to 3, have what we call Club Excellence. And this is where we tapped into the professional artists community of New York City. Broadway was closed. Artists, venues were closed. So we said, you know what, we have an artistic director that works for us. And she tapped into her network and we had over 35 professional artists teach specialty classes for our entire network, the entire year from 1 to 3 o'clock. And I can say by far, it is the number one thing that everyone loves. The leaders, the teachers, the parents, and more importantly, the kids. And the kids are doing everything: choir, vocal classes, African dance, tap. They're singing. They're doing spoken word. They're doing visual arts. I mean, it's a long list. They're doing band. They're playing instruments. I mean, 35 artists. We have 35 different classes, and
amazing.
We became a workforce. I mean, a developer in the neighborhood. We provided income. We allowed the artists to share their gifts with our kids, their creativity with no shackles on an arts curriculum or some kind of standards about, oh, you got to teach this form of dance, you got to do this. I said, look, just be free, be who you are, and let our kids love and enjoy your craft. And what happened was magic.
I will say, I spoke to you, I want to say it was in September, October, and I was telling you that a lot of schools struggled with, they didn't know where their kids were or who was attending. And I told you I was dealing with about 15 different schools who had called me. And you told me every morning I get up and the first thing I look at is the attendance roster. and I can point to any kid who has not been sitting in the school, and we know immediately to reach out to those parents. So what was that like for you to re-engage at that level? You're already an anchor. Everyone knows who you are in the school, right? We know that school, but all of a sudden, kids have not, and you said it to me, you said kids have not met their teachers this year in some schools. And it struck me that you were the first leader to say that to me. And so I had to step back and say, oh, how I answer this question is much different than if kids were back in school. So how did you re-engage parents? So you have the grocery program, you have this incredible arts program. You kept small businesses open because now you're in your neighborhood. People are shopping in their bodegas. The neighborhood stays intact. What was it like re-engaging families coming back in September, even though they may not meet their teachers, but we weren't sure at the time?
So I had shared with you that we really I didn't have the problems of like that my colleagues were sharing, because we went into the pandemic already with a strong foundation around family and communication. And so during the spring, when there is a staff member who's in direct charge of you and your family and your well-being, there's a bond, there's a connection. So that's why we knew where all of our families were. We didn't lose any of our kids. If kids, if a kid had transferred to another district or something, like, we knew about it. Like, there weren't, like, I kept saying to my colleagues, how do you just lose kids? I was like, how do you not know where they, I was like, did the parent, like, our parents would never, and I'm not being like, I don't know. They just would never do that, because that's just not the relationship that we have. Like, parents will let us know, I'm moving. They talk to their teachers. They talk to the principals. We have a two-way, it's reciprocal communication. Like, we always know where our kids are. So it was no different in the pandemic. It was no different. Like, we knew where every single kid is. And we just, we kind of just transitioned what we do pre-pandemic, where attendance is taken quickly in the morning and calls are made. Calls are made before 9:00 to make sure that our kids are in school. And if they're not in school, we know why. So all we did was take that and do it virtually. So it was no different. Okay,
so we have a question. Any plans to scale what you do nationwide? And your friend Ray asked that question. So we love Ray. Ray's my fave.
I think what we do is, I share it. I talk about it all the time. I'm the kind of person where I see a problem, I come up with a solution, and I work backwards to solve it. And then I say, no matter what, this is going to happen. And then I come up with a second, like, I call it my crazy plan. So how can I do something that someone says can't be done? So then that, like, almost gives it a power boost, as my son says when he plays the video games. I feel like you say
all the time, what has not been done?
And I just say, what is the craziest thing that someone thinks can't be done for our Black and brown kids? I said, I'm going to do it. Let's ball out. Let's figure it out. And so I'm willing to work with anyone or share any of the things that we do. But at the end of the day, it comes from my heart. It comes from the staff members' hearts. Like, what we're doing is what you would want for your own children. Like, I don't want nothing less but the best for excellence scholars. So if that means I got to feed you, if that means you got to sit in the class with someone that was performing in The Lion King and is going to show you how to sing and how to be a professional performer, if that means I got to, like, for one of our teachers, drive to your house and drop off a charger because your parent went to work and they're an essential worker and they took the charger with them, and I can't, whatever it takes. Everyone who's watching here, if you have children, like, you will run through fire for your kids. You will do anything for your kids. That's the mentality that I had, and I've had it since day one, from the first day I stepped into a classroom. I am going to run through fire for these kids. And that's it. So if that's the starting point, then there's nothing that I can't do. I know how to win and I know how to lose, but I take more W's than I do L's. But when I take the L's, I learn big lessons and I switch them to become a win. But I'm going to win for my kids. It's no different than when I went to the staff and I said, hey, I see the criteria for being a national blue ribbon school. We can do this. And someone said, there's no national blue ribbon school in the Bronx. And I said, what does that mean?
There was not.
So I said, so can we do this? What does it take? We listed everything that it needs. I said, we already do this. We already do this. We already do this. We got to boost this. And it should be a foregone conclusion. And we did it. So that's how I approach everything. The data was coming back through our wellness checks that families were losing their jobs and that food was low. So I said, we need to feed them. And we went through all the different steps. And I said, I'm not sending nobody in no damn food line. That's just whack. I'm not about to stand in no, what is that? Why would you want someone to go? I mean, I'm not saying if you're hungry and you got to stand in the line, you got to stand in the line. But I felt like that was like fifth on my list. What are the other ways that we can feed families? You know, so it's the type of problem solving and the creativity that you do when it comes to your own personal life. I don't cut any corners when it comes to my schools. I don't cut any corners. So, I mean, to answer your question, Ray, I think everybody can scale it. You just gotta want it. You just gotta want it for your schools and your families and figure out a way. And then on top of that, you gotta raise money to do it. So I have been able to raise money, and our board members raised a lot of money for the grocery store initiative. They pretty much funded majority of the initiative.
And that will be for another session one day about working with the board. How did you begin? Christy is asking, how did you begin branding your new campuses to build applicants and wait lists? But before you answer that, I think before you started with Bronx Excellence, there was no wait list. I think that was part of the problem, that kids were actually leaving the school. And then it's years later, we're talking about your wait list, and the number was so outrageous that how would you not replicate that model? So how did you begin branding your new campuses to build applicants and wait lists?
Oh, I got to dig in the crates. So that was like 2007. I think one of the first meetings I had in the community, I did some stats. So I'm big on like numbers and like giving stories so folks can really visualize and understand. And I said, look, I think that year it was the third grade test scores, and I had found some data around third or fourth grade test scores being calculated to find out like the number of prisons and beds you're going to have in the prisons or something. It was some data like maybe 15 years ago that I had studied. So I shared it with the community, and I said, so either we're going to have a high performing school where the kids are going to go to college and their test scores are going to be here and they're going to prove it, and we're going to have a robust curriculum and I can deliver that. Or what's the status quo? Do you want you want prisons to be built on the backs of our test scores, or do you want more colleges being open on the back of, on the backs of our test scores? Let's make a decision, and we're going to do this together. So it was a lot of talk, inspirational, kind of like, believe me, trust me, I've done it before. And then at the end of the day, like, I don't lose. So you want to be down with the winner, then come to excellence. Come on over to excellence. And so it kind of started that where they had to build trust. So that first year, I think we had and I had a big public lottery, in the neighborhood with the big drum and pulling out the names, all that kind of stuff. And so then I think that year we had about 500 students on the waiting list. But then after that first year, it was like 1,500. And then I think by the third year, it was 5,000. And that's when I said, oh man, there's demand for high quality schools. And so that's how it kind of started. But I also deliver on my promises.
How would you recommend new school leaders? And I do think this is a problem with new schools. How would you recommend new school leaders develop a family and community engagement plan? And by far, that is the biggest question from charter school boards. How do we go about, we say we're part of the community, what does that really mean? So how would you recommend, if you had to give a new school leader a pep talk about how to start their family and community engagement plan, where do you start with that conversation? Other than know your community, which, stop dropping applications in places you don't know about. But how do you talk about, with new school leaders, how to develop their family and community engagement plans? It's a really good question.
Well, first, the leader is going to have to check themselves and see if they actually believe that the families in the community are valuable. If they don't find any value in the families that they're working in, then their community engagement plan it doesn't really exist. It's just you writing up something. So you really have to check yourself, your own biases, and say, do I really feel like there's social and cultural capital in the families and in the communities? Is there intellectual capital? Is there economic capital? If you can check off all those things and you believe that and you value that, then the first thing you're going to do is hire from the community where your schools are. Because if you think that there's capital to be leveraged, then you don't need to pipe in people from outside of the community to work in the school. There are folks in the community that deserve the jobs and they want to work in their community. They want to walk down the street and go to work. They want to contribute. There are young folk who go off to college and want to come back and work in the communities that they grew up in. So that's the first thing. Are you hiring folks from the community? If you're not, then how can you have a community engagement plan like that? I mean, that is just basic. If you walk into a school and everyone looks like somebody that doesn't even live in the neighborhood, then it's a wrap. It's a wrap. That's the first. So I would say, in human resources talk, you need to come up with a talent and recruitment plan and actually walk the streets and recruit from within the community. You'd be surprised. You really be surprised. I think the next thing you need to do, which is something that Excellence is working on, because we're not at an excellent point yet with it, but your board should also reflect community folks. Yeah, I'm almost there. We're getting there. I don't want people calling me out and be like, I went on our website and I saw those board members, they're not from the community. So I don't want you saying that, but I think that there should be some folks from the community who represent that and understand my journey has been different. I went from one school and then I opened up the CMO 10 years later. And so I have trusted board members that I've worked with for over 15 years that work on all the boards. And so they are true allies. True allies to the work that we do. I wouldn't have been able to do any of this work without their true allyship. I did a training with some of my board members and we were talking about, I didn't go in, it wasn't a deep DEI training like I hear everybody else going through. It's none of that. They don't need that kind of work. But we were just talking about what does it really mean to be an ally? And I gave an example of if I was going to hug a pole that had electrical current in it, being an ally means that you would hug me, knowing that you would get electrocuted. and my board member said, "Oh my God, yes, we would hug you and we would just be electrocuted together." And I was like, "Word." I was like, "That's the allyship I'm talking about. We all gonna be electrocuted together." So Yeah.
I-
So that's the kind of, but definitely a community engagement plan. Thanks, Naomi, for asking that question. You need to hire from the community. Your board should reflect some community members. And I think if you could start off there. And then also just value your families. Like, you're not working with them and teaching them in spite of them. They're the first teachers. You're number two. You're number two on the list. The families are number one. So at the end of the day, it's their kid that they're sending to you to educate. So you have an obligation as a service provider. Like, everyone talks about servant leadership. If it's really about servant leadership, then you are working together with the family because you have become a family. Like, we have our family chats at the beginning of kindergarten, and that's where we say we're signing this contract because we're going to be together for a very long time, not just the 9 years that you're going to go through an excellent school, but even afterwards. So what does that mean when you are working with someone that you consider to be your family member? I think that's true. I would say the first level of engagement to where you grow to where it's community investment.
There's a lot of emotional investment, by the way, in community and family engagement that people don't realize. So if somebody can't really tell me about their families, or, I'm telling them there's an immigration services group right down here, why don't you partner with them? And no one even on the board even knows of it. But you reminded me of a story. I went to a school, not in New York, but I went to visit, and a board member actually said to me, I asked how often they visit the school, and the board member said, I wouldn't be caught in that neighborhood after dark. And I remember I had that moment of, he's got to go. Like, you have that total moment in your head of, this person has to get off your board. And I think it was the realization that the school leader heard it and didn't acknowledge it. But there's this community piece of, you need to stand up for your families and students. And board members need to attend events and come to the school and show the support in other ways. So I know we only have about 2 minutes left. Biggest lesson as an anchor, you're a true community anchor. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat in the Q&A. Your biggest lesson going into next school year that you're going to take away from COVID. So, meaning after back into school, what is the lesson that you're like, you know what, we learned this then, but we're going to keep it with us?
I think one of the biggest lessons we've learned was, again, I shared that I firmly believe in leveraging the community, and that it's an ecosystem where we're all raising and nurturing the scholars and supporting the families. But I think I even learned that I could actually do more. And so what I'm going to be doing next year is actually creating a talent pool of folks, retirees from our communities, folks who are underemployed. So there are a lot of immigrant families that move, and you find out that they were educated in their country and they are working jobs that are just well below their education level. And so you tap that. That is an intellectual resource that we just completely miss. And we've taken advantage of it at Excellence in very informal ways. Like, for example, I've heard like someone say, yeah, my dad has a master's in biochemistry, but he drives an Uber. And I'm like, well, he's going to be tutoring the math kids that need to take the Regents exam in between his Uber drives. And I'm going to pay him to do it because I'm not going to let that go to waste. You know what I'm saying? So instead of it being kind of like this informal network of, we know what families can provide, we're actually codifying it and formalizing it. And I think that I probably can create over 150 new jobs for families. And that's how we're going to use our COVID dollars, federal dollars. I'm actually creating a brand new workforce of retirees, college students and our alum, and actually folks who are underemployed. And they're going to be tapped to support learning loss. And so that's one of the things, like taking an idea and something that's worked at a very smaller informal level and actually formalizing it and being smart about all the millions of dollars that everybody's getting to deal with learning loss. Like, put that money back into the community. Like, folks need jobs. They need help. So let's get them to work. Let's tap those retirees. Let's get the mature, I call it the granny and grandpa force, where they're doing read alouds with the kids virtually, or they're volunteering in the school. People want to support. Do not like, you got to go into the community. Do not think that because you're working in a low income, historically underserved neighborhood, that there's no talent there, because it is there. And that's the reason that excellence is excellence, because I make it happen. I find those folks.
Okay. I know that we have to wrap up. I see that they gave me a 2-minute warning.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say, so somebody actually wrote that it hit them like, I think it was Naomi. We're just going to go to this chat, but it'll let me scroll up, but for some reason it will not.
Yeah, I can't see the chat.
Okay. The families are the first teachers, and that reminder hit us like a brick wall last year. And Naomi, I think that's a fair statement to make of a lot of people. I think they were ill prepared I think a lot of schools didn't know how to deal with parents one-on-one. And it was a surprising time to learn, especially when you needed the parents the most.
Mm-hmm.
Any final advice for our beautiful attendees to take away? Life lessons? Any questions from the team out there too?
I would say, if you're going to continue to do this hard work, number one, I thank you. But I will also challenge you to love the children that you serve, to love the families, to care for them as if they are your own. And a lot of decisions that you would make would be different if you treated folks like they were your blood family. There are certain things that you wouldn't tolerate. There are certain things that you would fight for harder. There's certain things that you just would persevere through because it's a loved one. So I would say, if you're going to continue to do this work, you got to love it and love them and love all the good, the bad, the ugly, the ups and downs, the peaks, the valleys, because it's worth it. It's worth it in the end. So that's my advice. And if you're trying to figure out how to do it, reach out to me. I can help you do that. I can get you into love shape, or I can get you to like push harder for what other people would say, other people's children. But I never say that. From day one, I've always said my families and my kids, because as long as I say my, then they'll be treated that way. If I use a different pronoun, if I say them, if I say those, if I say they, then they're always going to be disconnected. But if I say my family, my parents, my kids, then that love is never going to go away. So that's my advice for everyone.
I would like to say too that I think one of the reasons we became friends is we went into even the entire charter school world conversation. And so I come at the entire movement from the way you do, which is you're here to serve the families and students. And in 22 years, I have not deviated from that mindset. There have been days when, you're like, oh, I can't keep doing this. But then I meet a Charlene Reid, and it reminds me why I got into this work on purpose. I am so grateful for her schools. For those of you who didn't know this, when Secretary Cardona was speaking, he actually mentioned, when asked about charter schools, he actually spoke of Dr. Reid's school in Connecticut. And it was literally like watching a race and you hear somebody say her name and everyone's screaming like, oh my God, your school was mentioned by Secretary of Education. So thank you. Thank you for being a true human, kind, compassionate charter school person. And it is so my privilege to know you and get to work with you all the time. And so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for everyone who attended.
And we had some chats, and I think somebody wrote, it's Philly. Hold on. Let's say. Great. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Dr. Reid, thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Take
Be
care.
safe, everyone.